A man from Springfield now in custody after state police found narcotics inside of his car. Last Wednesday, a state police trooper patrolling Bay and Tapley streets saw a car with a temporary license plate. And after pulling that vehicle over, the trooper identified the driver as 59-year-old Orlando Pinto of Springfield. Pinto did not have a valid license and was removed from the car after the troopers saw a plastic bag of suspected crack cocaine inside of it. And then during a search of the vehicle, 2 more baggies of additional suspected narcotics and a digital scale were also found. Additionally, it was discovered that Pinto was wanted on criminal charges out of Springfield and in Westfield. Pinto was placed under arrest and is now facing several motor vehicle and drug-related charges.